Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor in introducing a great friend and colleague, Dr. Mark David Milliron. And if I were to tell you all that he has done, we'd be here for a couple of days. So let me just start by telling you that he's likely to provoke you, maybe make you a little uncomfortable, and perhaps those of us in education most uncomfortable of all. He's a great innovator and entrepreneur. He makes things happen, and he makes them happen for students. As the Deputy Director for Higher Education with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he has led a national effort to change the conversation from just enrolling students and market share to student success and what happens and how they exit. He has a distinguished career as an award-winning leader, author, speaker, and consultant, well known for exploring leadership development, future trends, learning strategies, and the human side of technology. Mark has worked with hundreds of universities and colleges, and many community colleges, K-12 schools, corporations, associations, and government agencies in the United States and across the world. He is known for, in particular, for his experience serving and having founded and served as the CEO for the private consulting and service group Catalyze Learning International. He previously served as the endowed fellow, senior lecturer and director of the National Institute of Staff and Organizational Development in the College of Education at University of Texas, where he earned his doctorate, and was a summa cum laude graduate of Arizona State University. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mark David Milliron.
So Christine forgot to tell you that I was president of my 8th grade class. Twice, actually. You'll get that. So we're going to jump into a conversation because as I think the power of this room is the power to catalyze conversations that count. Conversations around the courage to compete, conversations around are you ready, are they ready? And jumping into this conversation from the seat in which I sit right now at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is particularly appropriate. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has a very simple mission. It's to try to help people have the chance to live healthy and productive lives. That's the core mission of the organization. How that plays out internationally is in work in global health and global development, literally trying to cure AIDS, trying to cure rotavirus, trying to end poverty in some of the most heartbreaking situations around the world you can see. But in the United States, the bulk of our work, in fact, almost all of the work, is on education. And part of the reason it's focused on education has to do with some of the data that has already been shared from the stage today. But I'll just break it down in a way where the data that hit Bill and Melinda in particular between the eyes around education, and they've been in this business now for over a decade of trying to catalyze change in the world of education. But one of the reasons why we've cascaded into the post-secondary world and into higher education is because of a little data point that basically says that the intergenerational transmission of poverty in the United States has never been higher at any time than now. Which basically means you've never been more likely to die poor if you were born poor than right now. Anybody see that as a problem? It's kind of completely against the American dream. The single biggest disruptor of that cycle of poverty is a little thing called education. And it's not just K-12 education anymore. Here's the big difference. The disruptor of that cycle of poverty is the attainment of some kind of post-secondary credential. And I don't mean a college degree for everybody. I'm talking about apprenticeships, certifications, diplomas, and degrees. That family of post-secondary credentials allows somebody to have a pathway to possibility, a pathway out of poverty, which sounds really exciting. And what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about how we're going to tackle that challenge. Now, I bring really good news. I am not going to use any PowerPoint. I do a lot of student focus groups, and students have let me know that many people who use PowerPoint have no power nor a point, so I'm careful. But I do want to list some data around this, and what the data are that we have done an amazing job at opening up access in higher education in this country, getting people to the front door of higher education. We invented land-grant institutions, junior colleges, technical colleges, rolled out community colleges in the late 1940s, and especially through the 60s and 70s. We've been all about this notion of access to opportunity. But now the conversation has to change, because what we know is that almost half of the students that start higher education never finish. They never achieve any kind of credential whatsoever. And the challenge for us is not so much that we're falling way behind the rest of the world, is that the rest of the world has begun to catch up. They completely get this is a learn-to-earn world, and they're investing big time in the world of education, and they've caught us. We've gone from first and post-secondary attainment to anywhere, depending on how you read the data, anywhere from 9th to 13th. And so suddenly people are saying, wow, we've got to figure out how our students are going to be able to compete in a more globally educated community of practice, if you will, especially in the business world. And for us, the even more troubling thing is the attainment issue. It's not just that 50% of all students that start finish, or less than that finish. It's that there is huge disparities based on income. If you're from the upper 2 income quartiles in the United States, you're anywhere from 60 to 75% likely to finish your post-secondary credential. If you're in the lower 2 income quartiles, you are about 12% likely to finish. So our challenge is trying to open up a robust, powerful, productive pathway to possibility for low-income students to leverage post-secondary education, to be able to make their mark, for strivers to be able to do their work. And a basic premise is that if they have the will, there should be the way. Are you with me on that? And the only way that can happen is if we catalyze some pretty powerful conversations on this. This conversation around education and the pathway to possibility is so important. You've got people like Newt Gingrich and Al Sharpton teaming up and working on education initiatives. Any issue that can get Newt Gingrich and Al Sharpton to work together has got to be serious, right? Because what we're seeing is that this really is becoming a difference maker. Now, a lot of people are doom and gloom about this. They will tell you this is in some ways we're in the death rattle of the United States kind of influence on the world. I completely disagree. I think we have always innovated in the world of education. We'll begin to innovate now, but the only way this is going to work is if folks like you in this room come together, business leaders together with education and government leaders, to have some pretty powerful conversations, to in some ways make Malthusian these predictions of death and decline of education. And the way we do that is by being willing to take on some pretty tough issues. And I'm just going to give you 3 quick conversations I would encourage you to take forward within this community and really dive into a little bit. Before I frame those conversations really quickly, I want to take you through an exercise to talk about the way you have those conversations. And for this exercise, it's based on neuroscience. I'm going to need your hands free for a second. So if you're holding something, you're tweeting, whatever you're doing, just kind of take your hands out for a second and put them up. What you're going to do is you're going to put your hands in the air like this. Everybody? Good. Now we're going to clap them together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Rub them up and down. Clasp them together hard. Put them down. Now look down at your hands. How many of you, by a show of hands, have your right thumbs on top? Your right thumb is on top. Raise your hand. Look around the room, everybody. How many of you have your left thumbs on top? Raise your hands. Look around the room, everybody. Okay, hands back down. When the neuroscientists are doing this study, they're studying something called autonomic functioning. Autonomic functioning is when your brain goes on autopilot. Your brain likes to get things wired, have it down into some pretty clear, concrete synaptic pathways. You have core autonomic functions you have no control over, like if you sneeze, you'll close your eyes. Then you have others that are based on kind of root patterns. And then you have others that just happen later on based on pattern behavior. Things like you arrive at work after 30 minutes and you don't remember a thing about the drive you just took, right? Get out of the shower, you're naked. You still have no idea if you washed your hair, but you were just in there, right? This one is an autonomic function that you do the same way every time, and right thumb, left thumb. They're always looking for the correlates. What is it correlated to? What is it related to in terms of how that function came to be? Now, what do you think the researchers thought the correlate was to this exercise of right thumb or left thumb? What do you think they thought drove it? Hand dominance was the first one, right? Whether you're right-handed or left-handed. You just saw the data. Do you think it's hand dominance? No. In fact, it's almost exactly 50-50, which kind of freaked them out. So they're grad students. They have lots of time on their hand. They really go after this. And they spend some more time researching it, and they start really diving in. And they actually, what do you think their next major theory was? Right brain, left brain, right? But there actually is a small correlation to that, but not enough to be make them feel like that was the actual root answer. So now they dove into it even deeper, and they started doing something called cluster analytics, where they take all the common variables they can put together around those common characteristics, but everything like Myers-Briggs, behavioral personality profiles, and they created a profile of the right thumbers and a profile of the left thumbers. And for you right thumbers, they have a great name for your group. They call you the sexy people. Okay, so you're the sexy ones. Now, I saw some of you switching thumbs. No, can't do that, right? Now, for the left thumbers, they've done the same kind of profile work, and they have a great name for you as well. They call you the sneaky people. The sneaky ones. Now, in an audience this big, if we're saying we're around 900, we're going to get, based on the data, and I've done this all around the world, and it's amazingly stable, we're going to get somewhere between 7 and 15 people who put neither their right thumb nor their left thumb on top. They put their thumbs side by side. How many do we get? Raise your hand if you're a side-by-side person. Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now, people, they say these are the ones to watch. Right? These are the ones who are sneaky about being sexy, right? I want to get you there. But let's go to the meat of this exercise. Hands back up the way they were. Okay, count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Rub them up and down. Clasp them together. Put them down. Now, slowly bring it up in front of your face. You're going to butterfly your fingers and hands back out like this. Good. Now, slowly put it back together the other way. The other set of fingers interlaced, the other thumb on top. Takes a second. Squeeze it and put it down. How does it feel? Awkward, uncomfortable. Somebody said sexy. I heard that. Okay. I want you to get this for a second. I want you to get this viscerally, because part of the problem in our conversations about education change and taking on the challenges of thinking about what are the tools, the technologies, the behavior that can help change education, especially to help low-income students be more successful and to create an ecosystem of robust education partners that can help a business community and an entire state in some ways be successful. The hard part of this conversations are not necessarily the extremes. The people who are angry about everything or are way too for something. Part of our challenge are people who've put in 10, 20, 30, 40 years of their lives into working on things like education, either from the business community or from inside as a member of a public school or a community college or university. They're deeply dedicated, and they have a sense of how it's supposed to feel, what it's supposed to be like. When you start talking about new patterns and new ways of doing learning, you start talking about new technology, how does it feel to them? Think it feels sexy? Not so much. And I want you to get that for a second, because as you approach catalytic conversations that are driving change, and I'm just going to give you 3. We can go on to a whole family of about 15, but I'm going to give you 3 of the biggest conversations that are driving major change, that are making people think differently about how they create these pathways to possibilities for the students in their communities. You got to think about how you approach this conversation, because some of it's going to challenge your preconceived notions about how it's supposed to be because of how your brain is wired in education. We are teaching and reaching students with tools and technologies we never experienced as learners for the most part, which is hard, right? Our kids are living lives with tools and technologies we never experienced, so we don't quite get it. And so for us, having these conversations is kind of difficult. And I'm just going to give you 3. One around acceleration, one around technology, and one around focus. And let's dive into them quickly, because I know we're short on time. The acceleration one is a conversation about trying to get out of the way of our students and get our bureaucracies out of the way so that students can learn at the pace that makes sense for them and they can be as successful as they need to be quickly. And I'm just going to give you 2 examples of this that come out of core partnerships. Now, you're already doing some of this work, which is great, but the key examples of acceleration, and I'm going to go to high ability students and to students who are really challenged. And I'm going to talk about the link between K through 12 and higher education. All around this country, the real press right now is to make sure that students early can get early accumulated credits in higher education, dual enrollment programs in early college high schools. You have some of that going on in this state right now with your Running Start programs. You regularly have students who are graduating from high school at the same time they are getting an associate's degree because they've earned college credits while they're in high school. How many of you think that's a good thing, right? I would argue you should double down on that and really think about how you can get more students early accumulated credit in high school, because the faster they can accumulate that credit, the more likely they are to be successful as they move into the higher education sphere. And what the data really shows us, and I've been in the student focus groups, many of our highest ability students are bored out of their minds, especially in their senior years. And the more we can get them engaged in higher education experiences and really kind of push them faster and farther, the more they could actually get some of this stuff done in a way where they can be radically successful. No reason to stand in their way. In fact, in a community that was radically distressed, in El Paso, they pulled together El Paso Community College, University of Texas El Paso, the local public school districts, and they opened 5 early college high schools. And they now have 1/3 of the graduates of El Paso Community College are high school students who are getting their associate's degree before they get their high school degree. That's how aggressive they are about this. And they now have 18-year-olds who are in high school who are getting junior level credits from UT El Paso while they're still in high school. How many of you know some kids who actually probably could do that because they're that smart? Our problem is our mind is wrapped around the buckets they were supposed to be in. And you have to really think about how you could accelerate those options for those kinds of kids. By the way, they're going to end run you if you don't allow them, because they're going to go through social media and their own personal learning networks to get their own accumulated credits. You got to think about how you can do it. Now let's talk about students that are challenged. Nationally, about 60% of the students who come into community colleges, 40% into universities, need some kind of what's called developmental or remedial education. Students who graduate with a 3.0 from high schools, who said they were ready, and then they move on to the higher ed, and the higher ed immediately says, guess what? You're not ready. Okay? And here's the bad part of this data. Students who test in developmental education are about less than 10% likely to ever get a post-secondary credential. And what happens is it ends up becoming what some people call the Bermuda Triangle of higher education. And they end up in these endless cycles of courses that just cause major challenges. People are beginning to really innovate with developmental education and think, instead of doing courses, let's do better diagnostics, find out exactly where they're behind, and give them targeted remedial programs that allow them to go as fast as they can go to get caught up. So instead of making them take 1 semester, 2 semester, a year's worth of coursework to get caught up, you actually get them in intensive labs with lots of tutoring, find out exactly what they want to know. I'll just give you a basic example of this. Students today walk into a community college, they test into developmental education, and all the test tells them is that either you're smart or you're dumb. That's it. That's the only information they get from the test. When you do the focus groups, that's what the students tell you. Basically, you're smart enough to go on to college work or you're not. And then you immediately get put into a course. It doesn't tell you the 5 things you don't know in that math thing, or of the 35 learning outcomes, the 17 you don't know. It just tells you, no, you don't got it. And so now we have to hope for those 16 weeks you go into that program, you're there for the 5 weeks that they actually cover the things you need to be covered. Do you see the problem with this? Okay. What people around the country are saying, why don't we give better diagnostics so we can find out exactly where they're behind, give them targeted remediation, allow them to go as fast as they can go. And there are people who are solving the remediation problem in a matter of weeks as opposed to a matter of years for these students. And let me tell you what, it is like a kidnap clock goes up. The minute a student is tested into developmental education, the longer they're in, the less likely they are ever to get a credential. It really, really matters. So trying to get accelerated options. And so they're doing things like math emporiums at Virginia Tech and other places where they, again, do the diagnostics, they get them in front of software with lots of tutors, and they get them to move at their own pace, and they can be done with a year's worth of coursework within 2 months because they have lots of intensive tutoring and allows them to go fast. So acceleration really matters. Now, you can't do acceleration as a conversation unless you do the second conversation, which is around technology. The technology conversation's tough because the minute you start talking about technology and education, it sucks the oxygen out of the room, which is all anybody ever wants to talk about. And they want to get into wars over what's better, online education or on-ground education. Ever heard that debate? Okay, here's the problem. That's not how the world works. Our world is a blended world. We're driving doctors crazy because we go to WebMD and fully self-diagnose and come in with printouts to our doctor's visits, right? We are in a deeply blended world. And I'm going to give you another example of this. Go ahead and take out your devices. Take out your iPhones, your Windows phones, your Blackberries, all the things you have. This is the business audience. My guess is some of you have 2 or 3 of these things, so go ahead and get them out. So as you've gotten them out, a number of you already had them out, I saw that. What I want you to do now is to find somebody on your right or your left who looks relatively trustworthy. I want you to trade your device with their device. Go ahead and trade them out. Okay, I want to make 3 quick observations. 3 quick observations. 1, there's a whole group of people in this room that are feeling really good right now because you just traded up. It's a good exercise. You like it. 2, I'm a student of human behavior. I love watching how people do things in these kinds of exercises. There's one whole group of people that when they hand their device over, feel the need to give you a mini orientation session to their device. Look, it does that. They're really excited about it. There's another set of people, for whatever reason, I'm not going to attribute what the issues are, either lock or turn off their device before they hand it to you, right? Got it. Third observation is the longer I let this exercise go, the more the anxiety in the room goes up because somebody is touching your device. So quickly, hand them back before we get into too much trouble, because I want to talk about this. I do this exercise to make the point. We live in a blended, mobile, deeply connected world. When you talk with students, they want to ask you, why do I have to go back in time to learn? Why aren't we using our mobile devices? Why aren't we using digital readers? More than half the books sold on Amazon now are now just digital books. And the kind of expansion of ebooks in education are taking off everywhere. Doesn't mean you can do it tomorrow, but boy, these conversations really matter. And thinking about how we use these devices to give students more access to more different kinds of curricular resources than ever before really matters. The conversation about textbooks is gone, folks. Because textbooks are only one form of curricular resource. We have a whole family of curricular resources now. We've got movies, we've got games, we have digital resources of all shapes and sizes. And how we connect students as quickly as possible to high quality curricular resources, that's the name of the game. And our challenge right now is how to get smart people around the table to figure out what's the right family of curricular resources to expose a student to help them learn, and then the instructional experiences to help them learn that concept. That's a different conversation than which textbook to adopt, right? And that's a different way of thinking about it. Then it has to be driven, especially, we've got to get in this game of analytics. And what frustrates me beyond belief, and the people in here in healthcare will get this because they've lived through this kind of evidence-based medicine infusion, is now how can we bring data, and not just bring data so our presidents and our superintendents and our board members get scorecards to look at performance of our students. You know how we're going to improve education? It's not by getting scorecards to trustees and school board members. The way you improve education with data is by getting the data to the students and to the teachers. If you can actually close the feedback loop so a student can actually experience something like this. Students like you who've had this problem in history have found these learning resources to be helpful. Wouldn't that be great? What does that sound like? Sound a little like Amazon.com that you experience all the time? Okay, so my wife got a call from her credit card company asking her if she lost her credit card. She said, I don't think so. They said, you know, we do think so. And she said, okay. And I said, do you mind checking? And she goes, yes, I'll check. And so she went and checked, and her credit card was gone, which immediately creeped her out. And so she began a conversation. And she's a nice Southern girl. She ended up in this conversation with a nice man who was in India at the time. And they talked for about 45 minutes. And this guy helped her unpack what happened. She must have lost her card about 2 hours earlier at a local coffee shop, because the person who then went and used the card went to a gas station that was within 5 miles of our house, but it was a gas station that Julia doesn't normally use. Based on her risk analytics, personality profile, behavioral profile the credit card keeps, they were able to flag the card. Now, they haven't called her yet. What they've done is they've raised it to another level of analysis to see if anything else out of the ordinary happens, to see what they can do to intervene. Then this is the one that really freaked her out. They bought an amount of gas she doesn't normally buy. She owns a Suburban. It takes $600 to fill up her car. They bought something less, boom, second trigger goes off, says call that customer, make sure they're the one using the card. Think about this for a second. Millions of customers worldwide, and within 2 hours, a man in India calls a woman in North Carolina, and they turn the card off. Wouldn't it be great if we had risk analytics and education that said, a student just did this and did this, they're about to drop out? There are these kinds of initiatives going on all around the country right now. The folks at Purdue have a program called Signals. All Signals does is take the basic behavioral data from students in the course, and it gives them a traffic light. And every time they log into the course, the traffic light is either green, yellow, or red, and basically says this: students who did the kinds of things that you're doing passed successfully, green light. Students who did the kind of things you're doing had problems, yellow light. Students who did what you're doing failed miserably, stop immediately, talk to somebody. And every time they log in, based on their current behavioral data, the signal comes up. It increased their chemistry success rates by 50%. Just by getting the data to the students. Okay, and then getting the data to the faculty members. Again, there are technologies now we can leverage, and if we can close these loops, think about video games. Any of you have any kids that play video games? Okay, how much effort will they put in to go from one level of the game to the next level of the game? Anybody who says our kids can't concentrate have never watched this behavior, right? Even if you say they can't collaborate, they collaborate with hundreds of people online to go from one level to the next. Part of the reason they do is they get rapid feedback. They're constantly closing feedback loops. In fact, if you want to read a great book, read the book by Guy that's talking about what video games have to teach us about learning and mastery. Because guess what you have to do in most video games? You have to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and ability at one level to go to the next level. Sounds a lot like what? Education. Right? So the conversation here is about how do we leverage technology and put it on purpose to help students, especially struggling students, because what we find is if you unpack the data, what really struggling students, especially students from low-income backgrounds, need is a blend. They need a blend of technology resources and human interaction and deep human intervention that can help them be successful. And as we've learned that from initiatives like Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative, we learned the importance of using technology, and I love this, to make the human moments precious. Simple things like let them watch the lecture at home on a digital video and do the homework together in class. Make that the class time and flip the experience for the students, because where they get lost is during homework, not during lecture. During lecture, they can stop and go as they're kind of making that work. It's called the flip model that a lot of people are really using. Not new, but now technology makes it work. Third, as you drive conversations around acceleration and technology and innovation, you got to lean into conversations around what you're going to focus on. Great thing is your community has really been driving this conversation around STEM, which is a powerful conversation. I would encourage you to double down on that. More than 63% of the jobs that will be created between now and 2018 will require some kind of post-secondary credential. Most of that will be STEM-related credentials, so doing the STEM work absolutely matters. But you got to combine that in a radical way with what I call the big four. And the big four are creative learning, critical learning, social learning, and courageous learning. Okay, critical learning, critical thinking, problem solving, decision making. Employers are sick of employees who show up and just say, just tell me what I absolutely have to do and then I'll show up late and leave early. Would that be okay? Okay, they want people who actually want to jump in and help solve problems and can be a part of the larger conversation. They can be creative contributors to this mix. If you haven't read the new Richard Florida article in the Atlantic this month, absolutely worth the read, talking about how an ecosystem of education providers helps that create that creative spirit and leadership among the rising students to help contribute to an economy. But then social learning. And social learning in this complex technology-connected world, we need students who know how to navigate this complexity well. They need to know when to send an email, when to use a social network, when not to use a social network. They need to know how to write a blog post. They need to know how to write an email. They need to know when to get off email and have a live meeting with somebody. They need to know when to do small groups. And we're all struggling with this, folks, man. I travel 200,000 miles a year, and almost every time I enter an airport restroom, some guy in a business suit comes in on his cell phone on what sounds like a very important business call. And I don't know the etiquette. Am I allowed to flush? I don't know. Do I have to yell mute first or something? I think we're all trying to figure this out. But let me just get very basic with you. How do most people get their first jobs? Do they get their jobs because of the great credentials they have? How do most people get their first jobs? Social connections. Why are most people fired in this country? Take out economic downturn and layoffs. Why are most people fired in this country? Is it because of technical incompetence? No, most people are fired. If you do the AMA studies or the SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management studies, what you find is most people are fired for interpersonal conflict, that they can't get along with somebody else. Now, the company will go to great lengths to find another technical reason to fire them, but the real reason they're firing them is because they can't get along with them. SHRM calls it the jerk effect. Either you're fired because you are a jerk or you're fired by a jerk, but there's always a jerk involved somewhere in the process, right? If this is the truth, we need to infuse social skills more than ever into our curricula and into our experiences so students can understand what they're really going to experience out there. The science, technology, engineering, and math massively matters, but you absolutely have to have critical thinking, creative thinking, and social learning along this process. And the last one is courageous learning. They have to have the courage to learn new things. We are preparing students, by and large, for jobs that don't exist yet. Things are changing so radically. They need to be able to change gears and learn in different ways. Eric Hoffer had a great quote from the early 20th century where he said, "Learners inherit the future. The learned usually find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists." It's a great conversation we are rolling into. So as you do this work and think about how you're going to catalyze conversations to change education, I just want to leave you with a couple final things as you drive those conversations around acceleration, the use of technology, and then what these students are going to learn, what you're going to focus on. I would just close with two final ideas. One, as you have these conversations, you've got to buckle your seatbelts because two groups are going to come out of the woodwork in a big way. One group you know well, I call them the caustic cynics. Caustic cynics are angry about everything. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. You bring manna from heaven, it's too salty for them, they're angry, right? A friend of mine calls them cave people, colleagues against virtually everything, right? How many of you know a cave person somewhere in your world, right? If you don't know a cave person, you might be. Okay. They're only equal in their influence by true believers. The true believers will overpromise and underdeliver, and they'll cut the credibility out of your initiatives. In the world of education, you have people who are so into online education, they think it's going to fix everything, including poverty. And you're going, hold on, okay? The idea here is most of the conversations that happen in education get taken over by these extremes, and they end up being useless. Because these groups are loud, they're boisterous, they're dominating, and what happens is the really powerful conversations of the Reason Center never happen. The only way this can work is if you're willing to calm down the caustic cynics, temper the true believers, and get a broad cross-section of constituents like the people in this room together into some courageous conversations about how you create an ecosystem of education that creates a powerful pathway to possibility for our students. That's how you can make a difference for our students on the road ahead if you're really going to do this work in a significant way. Final idea. The spirit you bring to this really matters. I was traveling in Singapore recently, and as I was leaving, I had this really interesting experience. When you travel in Singapore and you look like I do, you kind of stand out just a little bit. In Singapore, it's predominantly Chinese. I was probably at least a foot taller than almost everybody who was there. And as I was at the airport, I had one of these moments where I really felt like I was an outsider, mainly because as I walked into the airport, I realized right across, I saw everyone was kind of like looking upset at something, and I looked across the airport and figured out what it was. There was a guy in the same area who is clearly from Texas. I know he was from Texas because he was about 6'5" with a cowboy hat on and a giant belt buckle, and he was telling everybody, "I'm from Texas," and he was screaming and just berating everybody and throwing things, and his wife was apologizing to everybody, and he was just out of control. And then I realized that as I walked in there, everybody just assumed I was with them. So I'm moving away from them as best I can. It was terrible. And I ended up going upstairs, and I came into the line, and he ended up being like 4 people in front of me in line. And he is now in front of this 4'11" Japanese woman. We're about to go from Singapore to Japan off to Los Angeles. And he is just chewing her out. He's like, on American Airlines, this would never happen. And he's screaming, and he's yelling, and just completely out of control. Now, what amazed me was not him. I've seen jerks like that in the airport before. What amazed me was her. She was unbelievably under control, easy and comfortable. She just let the screaming go. It was like watching a Zen master at work. Because this guy's going crazier and crazier, and she's calmer and calmer. And finally, after about 15 minutes of his craziness, she gets him on his way, and he goes. And I get up there a few people later, and I don't know why I feel the need to do this on behalf of all America. I am so sorry. You know we're not like this. And she was laughing, and I said, but I got to tell you, I don't know what kind of workforce training they have here at Singapore Airlines, but you were amazing. I don't know how you handled that. And she goes, oh, it's not training. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, I'm Japanese. And I go, okay. She goes, and we understand bachi. And I go, bachi? She goes, mm-hmm. She goes, for example, today that man is flying to Columbia, South Carolina. I said, okay. She goes, but now his bags are flying to Columbia, South America. She said, that's bachi. The spirit you get in will be the spirit you get out. I was really nice to her. I encourage you as you take on these conversations, as you take on your continuing work, as you continue to collaborate with great organizations like this, you bring the right kind of spirit, because the spirit you put in will be the spirit you get out. And boy, I got to tell you, the folks in your community that are striving, who have the will and who want the way, need your help. And every bit of effort you put in here will just help in this powerful pathway to possibilities for these folks. And it's worth every minute of your effort. And I applaud you for it. Thanks, folks.